Good evening, welcome to tonight's program. My name is Jeffrey Mainville. I'm the Executive Director of the Nova Webster House and West Hartford Historical Society. Tonight we present the final episode, the last of a three-part series, The Original Promise of America. We launched this last July, starting off with The Pursuit of Happiness, followed up with Part 2 in September, with a focus on the topic of liberty. And after an unforeseen pause on our schedule, we are very pleased to bring this series in for a landing with All Men Are Created Equal this evening. I'd like to welcome our Nova Webster House members in attendance this evening and mention that although this lecture is free tonight, being presented free of charge for everyone, most of our lectures and events will usually have some sort of a fee to cover our costs, and yet our museum members will often enjoy discounts on tickets to these programs. We have lots of lectures coming up and other things too, social events, like for instance, the 10th annual Real Ale Harvest Festival is September 6th. That's a beer festival. And Nova Webster House members get $10 off the ticket price. That's just one example. We also rely on our members to keep this place vibrant, and your support enables us to continue to serve this community, preserve this National Historic Landmark. Did anybody notice the new roof going up on the
Yeah.
state's helping us with that, so that's very nice. And we promote the life and legacy of Nova Webster. Perhaps your interest lies with the second half of our name, West Hartford Historical Society. Well, your membership contributes to that too. We are hoping to develop a Women of West Hartford exhibit to launch sometime in early 2026, and are collaborating with folks involved with West Hartford 250 activities that are developing right now. Many of the lectures and events that you will see here in the coming year will be associated with the America 250 commemoration that's happening all across the country, and it culminates next summer in the 250th anniversary of America's Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 2026. I'd be remiss if I didn't welcome our new town historian. Is Mary Donahue in attendance tonight? No, she's not. Okay, well, a round of applause anyway for Mary. Maybe she'll pop in. I put her in my remarks because I expected that. Well, on with the show. Tonight's presenter is Gene Leach. He's a longtime resident of West Hartford, professor of United States History and American Studies at Trinity College in Hartford for nearly 40 years. Professor Leach came to Trinity College in 1975 with degrees from Harvard, Michigan, and Yale universities. At various points in his long tenure, he directed the American Studies program, chaired the History department, and directed the graduate programs in both of those fields. His scholarship has centered on American social thought and this country's working class. Professor Leach has written, lectured, and served on governing boards for several organizations devoted to Connecticut history and culture, including this one, the West Hartford Historical Society. He's a very good friend to this museum, and we're thrilled that he's back with us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Gene Leach.
Thanks very much. I'm delighted to be back. I think I've said this before in an earlier lecture, but I, as an American historian who became a historian because I grew up in Washington, D.C., and my parents took us to the Smithsonian regularly, cheap, as in free, and I've always loved museums of all kinds, including this kind, So I really think that any time is a good time to think about American history, particularly now. I think it's in some ways refreshing and invigorating to go back to the founding, when America was all future and all prospect. But at the same time, it's difficult to live with the founding fathers for too long without being disappointed in our current political class, as they call it. So in any case, clearly this site is deeply affiliated with the Revolution. Noah Webster was deeply engaged in creating this country, and then particularly in constructing an all-American culture for this country that was distinctly divided from the British and Europe in general. This is a particularly good place to talk about the founding of the country. Anyway, enough of that. I regret to say I don't have illustrations. As I was telling a few people earlier, the topic, my topic today, is the proposition that all men are created equal. All three of these lectures have been keyed to phrases in the Declaration of Independence: liberty, Pursuit of Happiness, now the proposition that all men are created equal, it's hard to illustrate equality. All men are, the Pursuit of Happiness was much easier. Even liberty was easy. But this is actually quite abstract, and equality then and now is very idealistic. So I couldn't come up with much to illustrate except for maybe 10 pictures of Thomas Jefferson, who is very much the inventor of this phrase. But I'll talk about him later. Anyway, pardon if I seem to be over referring to my notes. Partly that's because I as a historian, I love historical documents. I love to quote them. I'd rather transmit the historical actors as opposed to interpretations by fellow historians. I'm the historian in charge here, after all. I don't need to quote other people. But another reason is that my specialty has always been Civil War on to the present. That's really what I specialized in at Trinity for many years. And so this is a newly worked up area for me. And it's been utterly fascinating. And if people would like some recommendations on books on the Revolution, I certainly have them. I've just discovered some wonderful recent publications on the American Revolution. Anyway, with apologies for seeming to read as much as I do, but I think I at least offered you an excuse or maybe an explanation. The Webster House, needless to say, honors the great man who was born here, but it's far more than a monument to Daniel Webster. It's a museum dedicated to illuminating the early history of the nation that Webster played a significant part in creating. So it's not surprising that when Jeff Mainville came up with the idea for this lecture series, he was looking ahead to next year's 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. We just passed the 249th, of course, July 4th. The Declaration, which of course was the proclamation that led to the founding of the United States. About the purpose of the Declaration, there is no mystery whatever. The revolutionaries wanted independence from Britain. My subject is not that, but rather how the revolutionaries thought about the purpose of the independent nation they wanted to create. In other words, their hopes and expectations for it, the promise of America. So that I have titled this series, The Original Promise of America. Some revolutionaries cared chiefly about what an American republic promised them. They fought first for private, often selfish ends, but many revolutionaries fought also for the good of humanity, embodied in the principles they wanted an American republic to champion all over the world. And those principles are very much foregrounded in the Declaration. Historian Joseph Ellis says that the Declaration of Independence captures the essence of America's original promise to itself and the world. The main author of the Declaration, Jefferson, said much the same thing when he declined an invitation to attend a commemoration of the great document's 50th anniversary in 1826. He was very close to the end of his life at that point. Writing just 2 weeks before his death, Jefferson called the Declaration an instrument pregnant with our own fate and the fate of the world. Following Ellis, but mostly Jefferson, I have tackled two questions in these lectures. What did Americans think an independent republic promised them, the Americans, and what did they think an independent republic promised humanity? I think the Declaration outlined answers to both of these questions in a just outline, but nonetheless in a single sentence, a single majestic sentence. And that sentence, I'm sure you are familiar with. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Ellis calls these the best-known 58 words in American history. These were the words that historian Ralph Barton Perry had in mind when he famously said, "The history of American democracy is a gradual realization, too slow for some and too rapid for others, of the implications of the Declaration." Declaration, in a sense, is a promise, and the question is, will it fulfill that promise? I gave the first lecture of the series in July of '24. I argued then that the American promise, the Declaration listed last, the promise that the new nation would champion the right to pursue happiness, actually stood first in the minds of most revolutionaries. For them, the main thing they hoped to get out of an independent American republic was a good chance to build a comfortable and secure life for them and their families. Happiness. In my second lecture, which was September of last year, I discussed the American promise that the revolutionaries themselves always foregrounded. They always put this one first, not last, but first. And that is the promise of securing their liberty. Historian Drew Faust, former president of Harvard, argues that liberty remained Americans' public focus on into the next century. She hails both Lincoln and Frederick Douglass for calling on Americans to cling to the founders' original emphasis on liberty. In both of those previous talks, I mentioned another promise the revolutionaries saw in their new republic, the promise of equality. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That statement heads the Declaration's catalog of revolutionary principles, as if it were the most important, or at least the underlying one. These 5 words are the subject of this lecture, which concludes the Original Promise of America series. The revolutionaries' passion, the revolutionaries, that's what I'm going to call them all night, their passion for liberty is so well known, it's almost a cliche. We often ignore the fact that the drafters of the Declaration saw fit to affirm equality too. Why did they do this? It's seldom explained, and I'm going to, at this point, offer a few explanations. Perhaps the best reason why the signers of the Declaration endorsed equality was their conviction that liberty, their highest value, depended on equality. As early as 1748, a Boston newspaper wrote, "Liberty can never subsist without equality." And this comes straight out of radical English writers who influenced a great many of the founding fathers. Trenchard and Gordon, their publication is called Cato's Letters. A related reason why the Declaration drafters endorsed equality, in 1776, a great many colonists thought they were already living in an egalitarian society, and they were proud of it. One historian, David Green, notes the extraordinarily large number of families of independent middling status, in other words, middle class, in the British colonies. Probably a higher proportion of such people than in any other place on earth. Green goes on to estimate that the average white colonist enjoyed a better standard of living than any average person had known in the whole history of civilization. And he's got a lot of facts to back that up. Just imagine that. This country really didn't have to struggle to get where it was. The continent was so rich that it produced comfort for virtually the whole white population. And I will say more about that very quickly. Pauline Maier suggests a third reason for the prominence of all men equal in the Declaration. She points out that 18th century political thinkers widely considered the Republican form of government best suited to egalitarian societies. In short, for many white colonists, equality was not a dream. It was a prospect and a project. along with all this equipment, I should have an automatic page flipper, or maybe a small child to be a nice touch. But by the way, I really do appreciate all of these accoutrements. A flagon, a candle, bunting, perfect. But there was a grotesque fly in the equality ointment, a fly that mocked white Americans' supposed belief in equality. And I'm sure you know what it was: slavery. By the end of the 17th century, the first century in this country, slavery existed everywhere in the colonies. Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania all had higher rates of slave owning than the Chesapeake colonies. And by 1770, slavery was expanding in all colonies except New Hampshire. Most of the 56 men who signed the Declaration owned slaves, most of them. If they honestly hoped that slavery would one day disappear, few of them acted to realize that hope in their own time. In light of the prevalence of slavery, I have to ask, did the men who signed the Declaration, did the masses of Americans who read the Declaration really believe that all men are created equal? If they did, they conspicuously failed to live by those grand words. Abraham Lincoln alluded to this failure when, at Gettysburg, he said that while the nation had been conceived in liberty, it was only dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Equality was clearly not yet realized. The founders' contention is that it would move in the direction of equality. Recently, a prominent scholar has insisted that the Declaration drafters actually did believe in the self-evident truth of human equality. Danielle Allen, a Harvard political philosopher, contends that the Declaration helps us to see that we cannot have freedom without equality. She calls equality and liberty the twinned foundations of democracy. I think Allen is entirely right about equality being widely accepted today as a bedrock of democracy, but she produces very little evidence that revolutionaries thought that in 1776. Probably the only founding father who certainly did believe that all men are created equal was Thomas Jefferson, the man who first drafted the Declaration. But Jefferson was the most intellectual and idealistic delegate to the Continental Congress, and in these respects he was sort of on the fringe of the Congress. He subscribed to doctrines more familiar to political philosophers than to politicians of his time. Doctrines like the one that said all men were naturally equal because all possessed an inborn moral sense. That for him was a powerful argument in favor of the notion of natural human equality. None of Jefferson's colleagues at the Continental Congress shared his belief in the natural equality of humankind, and neither did the rest of Jefferson's white countrymen. To the contrary, in 1776, white male colonists almost universally believed that God made human beings profoundly unequal, and God intended them to remain that way. After the Revolution, these same people who had carried out the Revolution were intent on curtailing and controlling the liberty of other Americans. White men whose wealth qualified them to vote denied voting rights to women as well as to poor men, and they denied liberty altogether to the slaves who made up 20% of the population at the time of the Revolution. 1/5, much higher than today. Black people today, obviously. This last awful fact seems the greatest anomaly, the greatest flaw in the revolutionaries' worldview. White Americans who prided themselves on being the freest people in the world, as they may well have been, clamped on Black Americans one of the cruelest regimes of oppression in the world. The great historian Gordon Wood notes the horrific contrast between, and this is quoting him, the general well-being and equality of white society set against the gross inferiority and flagrant harshness that white society inflicted on slaves. But this anomaly did not seem anomalous to white Americans because they cherished private property quite as much as they loved liberty. In fact, they regarded the sanctity of property as inseparable from both the right to liberty and the right to pursue happiness. In the southern colonies, white people carried this doctrine to the extreme of holding that their racial superiority entitled them to own black people as property, as we all know. And if their slaveholding supported their liberty, it also handsomely supported their prosperity, both happiness and liberty. Plantation slavery made some of Britain's southern colonies the richest in the American mainland, among the richest societies in the world. Of course, Jefferson himself was a very wealthy slave owner. During his long life, roughly 400 enslaved black people toiled on his 5,000-acre plantation at Monticello. He freed none of them because, as much as he professed to love liberty and equality, he also loved the material happiness that slave labor produced for him. But this blatant hypocrisy bothered him so much. He's a very intellectual character and wants to be consistent and rational. In any case, he was so bothered by the hypocrisy that he attempted to shift the blame for American slaveholding onto the back of King George. In his draft of the Declaration, Jefferson listed among the colonists' grievances the completely bogus charge that George III had prevented them from ending the slave trade. According to Jefferson, the king waged cruel war against human nature, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty. By the way, he does not include equality in that listing. The Continental Congress judged Jefferson's charges to be unproven and politically unwise, so that they deleted the charge from the final version of the Declaration, which they approved on July 4th, 1776. So how much of all men are created equal do the founders really believe? I think only this much. They believed that all propertied white men are created equal. That's pretty much it. Far from espousing universal equality, the founders assumed their superiority to other kinds of human beings. They thought they were entitled to rise above and rule other people, and some, mostly in the South, thought they were entitled to downright enslave them. Consider the case of the Virginia planter Patrick Henry, whose speech at a convention in March 1775 was surely the zenith of revolutionary liberty talk. This is the most famous excerpt from that speech. "Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." Henry, I'll go into his background. Henry received 6 slaves as a marriage gift from his father-in-law. Eventually, he acquired many dozens more. Then in 1773, a Quaker neighbor of his, Robert Pleasance, who had freed his own slaves after educating them, appealed to Henry to do likewise. Henry replied with a gush of guilt, apology, and hypocrisy. He told Pleasance that while he admired the Quakers' noble effort to extinguish slavery, he could not join them. This is what he said. "I am drawn along," this is a letter to Pleasance, "I am drawn along by ye general inconvenience of living without them." The inconvenience of living without them. I cannot justify it. However culpable my conduct, I will so far pay my devoir, meaning duty, to virtue, as to own the excellence and rectitude of her precepts and to lament my want of conformity to them. In other words, I know what is right, but I'm just not able to do it. If we cannot reduce this wished-for reformation to practice, he's referring to himself, let us treat the unhappy victims with lenity. In other words, to be lenient toward them. This is the furthest advance we can make toward justice. This is Patrick Henry. Years later, when Robert Pleasance, when Henry was wartime governor of Virginia, Pleasance renewed his plea, calling on Henry to support a plan of gradual emancipation of the slaves. There's no evidence that Henry replied. He died leaving an estate that included 67 slaves. Probate records lumped them into the category of livestock, which is par for the course then. When Patrick Henry proclaimed, "Give me liberty," he might have said us, but he said me, he wasn't being theatrical. He was stating the conviction widely shared by white male colonists that they alone had a right to liberty because they alone possessed abilities and virtues that enabled them to use liberty wisely. The liberty they loved presumed the inferiority of all other people. Let's turn to the slaves themselves, well, black people, including free blacks, but first the slaves. Black Americans had always loved liberty more authentically than white Americans, since most of them were enslaved by white Americans. Ever since the first Africans were sold to Virginia colonists in 1619, slaves demonstrated their hunger for freedom by running away whenever they could. Absolutely epidemic throughout the slaveholding period. By the 1770s, some slaves in the northern colonies were not content to flee their masters. They began to seek freedom by suing their masters, often with the help of white supporters. At the same time, northern free blacks began petitioning for the outright abolition of slavery. According to historian Isaiah Berlin, the heady notions of universal human equality that justified American independence gave black people a powerful weapon with which to attack bondage. It is the momentous question of our lives, declared some free black Philadelphians. If we are silent this day, if we don't take advantage of the current revolutionary atmosphere, this is 1781, we may end up being silent forever. When the revolution broke out, white people fought exclusively for their liberty. Virtually none fought for equality, whatever the Declaration said. It was otherwise with the slaves. Blacks joined the revolution to gain their liberty and the equality they needed to keep their liberty. They believed that as long as whites considered them inferiors, any liberty they achieved would be perpetually at risk. Simply put, for blacks, equality and liberty went together. They were highly interdependent values. Not true for whites, very true for blacks. Slaveholders found blacks' passion for freedom incomprehensible. They told themselves that blacks couldn't survive in a complex society unless superior whites took care of them. Southern slaveholders sometimes clung to that belief for decades. In 1861, for instance, the vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, said that the Confederacy's cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition. Slaves fought back. Concealment and deception were their main weapons. Whites assumed that they could easily manipulate slaves, but slaves routinely played to whites' illusions in order to manipulate them. When whites took the role of benevolent guardians, blacks put on the masks of grateful children. A popular slave song celebrated their superior talent for masquerading. And here is a bit of it. You may call me Raggedy Pat, 'cause I wear a raggedy hat. and you may think I'm a workin', but I ain't. Talk about concise and meaningful poetry. That's brilliant. A Virginia slave named Aunt Aggie boasted, "I know things that the white folks with all their learning never find out and never search for neither. No, honey, the good Lord don't give everything to his white children. Black folks is his children too, and he gives us black skin and no learning, and he has made us work for the white folks. But the good Lord gives us eyes to see things that they don't." Another brilliant statement. Now, free black people. I've just argued that slaves deliberately concealed their thoughts, a practice that led some white people to assume that slaves couldn't think. Southern whites knew better. They feared what the slaves were thinking and responded by attempting to suppress slaves' thoughts. Many Southern states made it a crime for whites to teach slaves to read. In all Southern states, slaves who tried to learn to read were punished. The case of free black people is different. About their minds, we know a good deal because many of them were literate and quite a number of them published their thoughts, including the thought that their freedom could never be secure until whites accepted them as equals. The revolution was scarcely over when a black writer who called himself Othello reminded white Americans that they justified the revolution by claiming that all men are by nature and of right ought to be free. Othello knew how few white revolutionaries fought for blacks' liberty, much less for blacks' equality. But he and other free blacks clung to the faith that the revolution at least set the country moving toward liberty and equality for all. They proved to be tragically wrong. White revolutionaries never imagined guaranteeing freedom and elevation to anyone but themselves. Free black people like Othello were really the only Americans who trusted the new republic to grow into all the principles proclaimed in the Declaration, including equality. In the rest of this talk, and I'm more than halfway through, I'm sure to your relief, in the rest of this talk, I will first describe opposition to slavery that started to grow toward the end of the colonial period. Next, I will describe a burst of anti-slavery activity touched off by the Revolution that climaxed with the cautious abolition of slavery in most northern states. Finally, I will describe the new republic's rapid retreat from ideals of universal liberty and equality. Serious opposition to slavery first took root in Quakerism, the religion of Robert Pleasance. In 1681, when an English trader put Africans on sale in Philadelphia, some Quakers were among the buyers, but other Quakers scolded them for unchristian behavior. Meanwhile, New York Quakers published an exhortation and caution concerning buying or keeping Negroes, whom they called a real part of mankind. By the middle of the 18th century, these preachings spawned a full-fledged movement that led the Quakers to expel slaveholders from their meetings. But the Quakers were renegades from mainstream Christianity. We would call them weirdos in our time, or maybe they did then too. While they were rejecting slavery, the rest of colonial America was embracing it. By the time of the Revolution, the southern colonies depended on slave labor to produce all of their profitable export crops, especially tobacco and rice in the colonial period. Cotton came later, and also do hard work of all kinds. Northern colonies grew prosperous partly by trade with southern slaveholders, including trade in slaves themselves. For that matter, Northerners enslaved blacks too. Slaveholding was commonplace in Virginia and South Carolina, but it was not unusual in Connecticut and Massachusetts, far from it. By the middle of the 18th century, black people made up a larger proportion of the American population, 20%, as I said before, than they ever have before or since. While Virginians owned close to, white Virginians alone owned close to 200,000 slaves at the time of the Revolution. In some parts of the South, whites were a minority. For that matter, slaves made up at least 15% of the population of New York City at the time of the Revolution. 1 out of 10 New York households owned slaves, and slaveholding spread right up to the Revolution. The same was true in our own state, by the way. Years ago, 3 researchers found that this is quoting from their book, in 1790, most prosperous merchants in Connecticut owned at least 1 slave, most of them, as did 50% of the ministers in Connecticut. Our economic links to slavery were deeply entwined with our religious, political, and educational institutions. Slavery was part of the social contract in Connecticut. I could go on, but I really should move on. Then came the Revolution, which shook up everything in the British colonies. Fighting for their own liberty forced many rebellious colonists to justify their own tyranny over black people. Especially in the North, people who hated slavery but had never spoken against it now found their voices. The Massachusetts firebrand James Otis declared that all colonists, and I quote, colonists black and white, are freeborn and entitled to all the essential civil rights of such. The town meeting of Providence, Rhode Island, resolved that it is unbecoming the character of free men to enslave Negroes. Free black Bostonians petitioned the Massachusetts legislature to put abolition on the revolutionary agenda, adding that they expected great things from men who have made such a noble stand against the designs of their fellow men to enslave them. It was commonplace for whites to accuse the British, who did not allow them a role in their own government, they accused the British of tyranny over them, in other words, enslaving them. 19 natives of Africa, as they call themselves, petitioned the legislature of New Hampshire to recognize that the God of nature gave them, which is to say the 19 black people, life and liberty upon the terms of the most perfect equality with other men. These early appeals were rebuffed, but when the war broke out, blacks' value as military manpower compelled whites to listen to them. In the North, free blacks fought alongside white revolutionaries in defense of the liberty they shared. In northern and southern colonies, thousands of slaves volunteered to fight for the revolution to gain the liberty they never had. Actually, it was the British who first promised slaves freedom in exchange for taking up arms, which of course contradicts the Jefferson's contention that the British had foisted slavery on the colonies. The royal governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore, seeing how badly the rebels outnumbered his redcoats, led the way. In response to his offer to emancipate slaves who fled their masters, 1,500 Virginia slaves escaped from plantations to join the British. Soon, commanders in other southern colonies imitated Dunmore's initiative. Meanwhile, in northern colonies, it was rebel slaveholders who started freeing blacks who enlisted in the Continental Army. It's estimated that overall about 20,000 slaves fought in the Revolutionary War on both sides. Initially, George Washington, who was a quite serious slaveholder, I mean, he believed in it. Washington rejected the idea of inviting slaves to enlist in the Patriots' cause. He changed his mind when 18 of his own slaves ran away to fight for the British. A powerful incentive. At the climactic Battle of Yorktown, an estimated 1/4 of the American forces were black. The Revolution touched off a burst of idealism. As thousands of slaves fought for their personal liberty, a movement for general liberation spread among the white people of the northern states. One by one, northern legislatures adopted plans of gradual emancipation that freed slaves when they reached adulthood. By 1784, all the New England states, plus Pennsylvania, had adopted such schemes. New York did so in 1799, New Jersey followed in 1804. The schemes worked slowly, gradual emancipation, but they did work. The 1790 census found that in New England, so many slaves had been freed that for every black person who remained enslaved, there were 5 free black people. The 1800 census counted just 1,300 slaves in New England, almost all of them, by the way, in Connecticut. Here and there, some Northerners called for pushing beyond black emancipation to seek black equality. The preamble to the 1780 Pennsylvania Constitution stated, "It is not for us to inquire why, in the creation of mankind, the inhabitants of the earth are distinguished by a difference in complexion. It is sufficient for all of us to know that all are the work of an almighty hand." Unsurprisingly, the Revolution had more limited effects in the South. The great majority of Southern slaveholders owned only a few slaves, but these small fry were just as committed to slavery as baronial planters who owned hundreds of slaves. The same was true, for that matter, of all the non-slaveholders who made up most of the white South. They too cherished their status as members of a master race. Slavery saturated not just the economy, but the culture of the South. Nonetheless, slavery had always been a very mixed blessing for Southern whites. It made some of them rich, while it made all of them uneasy. Too many slaves ran away for their masters to delude themselves into thinking that blacks were content to be property. And although attacks by slaves on their masters were quite rare, whites always feared that one day blacks might gather together into mobs seeking revenge. Constant fear of slave revolt. The result was schizophrenia. To control the slaves, Southerners imposed on them a regime of brutal tyranny. Yet the stress of maintaining this regime, along with dread that the slaves might overthrow it, led many masters finally to decide that slavery was no longer worth what it cost them. Moreover, liberal planters like Patrick Henry agonized over the contradictions between their slaveholding and their republicanism. How could a man extol liberty while ruling his own estate as an absolute despot? At the outset of the Revolution, some slaveholders saw a way out of their dilemma. In 1776, the spirit of liberty in the 1776 Spirit of Liberty, a group of planters lobbied the Virginia Assembly to back a plan to free slaves when they reached adulthood, educate them, and then deport them. This early initiative failed, but 5 years later, the Revolutionary victory at Yorktown inspired new efforts to move away from slavery. Virginia made it easier for masters to free slaves in 1782. By 1801, Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, and Tennessee had all done the same. The Attorney General of Maryland struck the keynote of these actions when he called slavery inconsistent with the genius of republicanism. It lessens people's sense of the equal rights of mankind, and it habituates them to tyranny and oppression. In other words, the wave of anti-slavery thought begins to seep into the South as well. In 1787, Congress famously prohibited slavery in the Northwest Territory. By the 1790s, there were abolitionist societies in every state north of Virginia, actually in Virginia, but from there on up. And across the whole nation, the percentage of Black Americans who were free jumped from 8% to 13%. Soon, however, the liberationist spirit of the American Revolution collided with the radical spirit of the French Revolution. Ironically, significantly inspired by the American Revolution. The astounding, Lafayette and so on and so forth. Lafayette, we were here. The astounding French revolt against Louis XVI triggered a ferocious slave revolt on Haiti, a French island not far from Florida. This, for Americans, was a nightmare come true. Fearing that the Haitian example would inspire a slave uprising in America, many Southern masters stopped thinking about freeing their slaves and turned instead to tightening their control over them. For every Marylander or Virginian who had been reconsidering his commitment to slaveholding, there were now many Carolinians and Georgians who doubled down on it. Another cause of retreat from revolutionary ideals, independence swept away the hated British restrictions on settling the West. And that's a very complicated story. The British actually prohibited migration west, partly because they knew that the white settlers would spur war and probably genocide among the Indians, as they in fact did. But the other point is that the British quite logically figured that as Americans moved west, they are moving away from Europe. They are moving into their own space. And therefore, the more they moved west, the closer they were getting to independence. Independence finally swept away this hated British restriction. Now that they were citizens of their own country, white Southerners swarmed over the Appalachians to set up hundreds of new plantations worked by slaves. Thus, straight through the era of the Revolution, American slavery expanded, even boomed. The 1790 census revealed that the total slave population of the United States had grown far bigger than the slave population of the British West Indies. In Virginia alone, there were now 300,000 slaves, a 35% increase since the end of the Revolution. That's only 7 years later. Boom time. Back in 1782, Virginia adopted laws making it easier for masters to free their slaves. 20 years later, Virginia adopted a new law threatening freed slaves with re-enslavement if they did not immediately leave the state. A comparable pattern occurred in the North. There, most slaves gained freedom during the Revolutionary period, but none advanced toward the equality they needed to become true citizens. It became evident that many white Northerners had opposed slavery not because it oppressed blacks, but because it exposed them to unwanted contact with blacks. Even some abolitionists favored segregating the races. For example, a New York society that promoted the freeing, the manumission of slaves was all white. It had no black members, although there were plenty of black New Yorkers. Revolutionary enthusiasm for liberating slaves increasingly gave way to efforts to keep freed people from gaining any rights beyond liberty. Prior to the Revolution, some northern colonies had allowed voting by free blacks who owned a substantial amount of property. Now, as more black people gained freedom, more blacks were barred from voting no matter how much property they had. Ohio disenfranchised all black men in 1802. So did New Jersey in 1807, Connecticut in 1818. They had been able to vote. The new Constitution of 1818 prohibited their voting. Even in liberal Pennsylvania, a hotbed of anti-slavery activism, white hostility to free blacks mounted. In 1780, Pennsylvania adopted gradual emancipation, along with a Bill of Rights, declaring that all men are born equally free and independent. But during the 1790s, white Pennsylvanians grew fearful that hordes of blacks freed from slavery in Maryland and Virginia would swarm into their state. By 1805, the Pennsylvania legislature was debating proposals to load special taxes on blacks only as a way of deterring them from coming, or proposals simply to ban them altogether. Thus, by the 1790s, slavery was vigorously spreading in the South, and free blacks were losing rights in the North. So the big picture was this. The Declaration of Independence affirmed both liberty and equality and implied a connection between the two of them. In the 1790s, white Americans were aggressively separating these two ideals. Liberty, one thing, equality, a much more problematic and dangerous thing, they thought. Revolutionary zeal to emancipate slaves and uplift free blacks morphed into post-revolutionary concern to keep black people subordinate and apart from whites. White Americans had always asserted their superiority to blacks, but once they achieved independence, they began to demand flat-out white supremacy. In closing, I will cite two documents that illuminate this rapid repudiation of equality as a foundational national aspiration. First, no less a document than the Constitution, ratified just 5 years after the Revolution. Though the word slavery appears nowhere in the Constitution, 11 of its clauses bear on the fact of slavery, and 10 of those clauses protect slavery. So much for all men are created equal. If it were true that Republican government worked best in egalitarian societies, the pro-slavery Constitution spelled trouble for the new republic. The Constitution all but shouted its pro-slavery bias in the famous clause that called for counting slaves as 3/5 of a person. This was actually nastier than it sounded because its purpose was to ensure the property and amplify the power of slave masters at the expense of their slaves. The 3/5 clause not only nakedly proclaimed the inferiority of black people, it gave special advantages to the white people who owned them. Really, the most privileged people, the people with the most privileges granted by the Constitution are people who owned other people, not exactly true liberty lovers. Under the Declaration, white Americans emancipated themselves from British tyranny, observes one historian, but the Constitution suggested they might never emancipate blacks from their tyranny. Then in 1793, last page. Then in 1793, Congress confirmed and extended the anti-equality bias built into the Constitution by passing the Fugitive Slave Law, an act that swept away the last vestiges of revolutionary idealism. Actually, the Constitution, one of the pro-slavery clauses of the Constitution was a fugitive slave section. It simply it declared the right of white people to pursue and take back fugitive slaves. This new act in 1793 provides legal mechanisms for doing that and also obliges federal officers and other public officials to assist slave hunters in their efforts to recover the fugitives. Gordon Wood says this law, in effect, issued to every slaveholder a kind of vigilante's license to hunt down slaves who escaped from his property. It virtually invited slave hunters to kidnap black people they only suspected of being fugitives, even in states that banned slavery. This, by the way, is the story of 12 Years a Slave, Solomon Northup, made into a great movie. According to Wood, this law set the country on a path to making the federal government the guardian of slaveholding rights everywhere in the United States. I struggled to find a bravura closing for this lecture. I didn't make it. So I'm simply going to close, and I hope I've left at least a few minutes for questions. And if people have to leave, please do. 7:25. My God, that's much better than I expected. So at least, I'm an old-fashioned historian. I still do lecturing. Now everything's done by dialogue. Students don't read books. They hate to write papers. But I'm, look at me. Okay. So indeed, questions. This has not been a happy lecture. And I it took me twice as long to write this as the previous two, but very illuminating, I think. Yes, in the back.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's very interesting. You mentioned the 3/5 compromise. That was a Connecticut compromise, right? Is that something that was put forward by somebody in Connecticut?
No. I mean, Craig, can you help with that?
Oh,
Bicameral Congress.
yes.
Connecticut, even in the convention, the Constitutional Convention, Connecticut batted above its weight, as it has through most of its history, as a matter of fact. But that was not. Connecticut had a lot of slaves, and Connecticut owners were reluctant to part with them. I mentioned that at 1800, there were only, according to the census of 1800, there were only 1,300 slaves left in New England. Most of them that's 300 slaves in New England, most of them in Connecticut. But they were not responsible for the 3/5 clause.
You mentioned that it benefited the slave owners at 3/5. I mean, it certainly understand what didn't benefit the enslaved folks at that point. How did it benefit particularly the slave holders at that point?
Well, I mean, it's well to point out that that clause did not give slaves 3/5 of a vote or 3/5 of the rights belonging to white people. It was adopted largely to enhance the power of slave holders who insisted on holding on to slavery by giving them an advantage when it came to calculating federal taxes, and even more important, when it came to calculating representation in the Congress. And that second part is probably the most important, because most presidents were slaveholders. I think 13 of the presidents before Lincoln, 13 presidents in early America were slaveholders. In case you think that slavery is not deeply rooted in America. Yeah.
I have several comments. One, you made a point of quoting one of the plays, and basically she said that people don't see, well, that's the case with most people of color around the world. It's very necessary for us to pay attention, be aware, and stay woke. And awake, awoke, and awaken. And secondly, what's interesting about this to me is I'm thinking, well, actually, on the committee, well, that's pretty much promised check, because we're talking about white, well-heeled men back then who were gentlemen, armored, and therefore women, and certainly black people who were deemed property, were even part of that equation. The whole concept of equality being applied to a slave was probably the most absurd thing that people didn't talk about. I get Patrick Henry. Henry, like all the rest of them who own slaves and in and around the world today in different countries, didn't want to do any farm work. Because who took care of their farms? Who took care of their homes? Who took care of their kids? It was manual labor. These were not individuals who wanted to soil their hands, or their wives tend to those things. So, and what's striking to me is nothing has really changed, except for it looks different, but fundamentally it's still the same. And that is, black people were never considered human when they were kidnapped and dragged here. We were property, and therefore, property did not allow us to be deemed as humans. We weren't humans. We were heathen, we were primitive, we were creatures, which unfortunately is still fundamentally the mindset of many people in this country, and also in other countries around the world where oppression occurs. So I just wanted to make those comments because I was sitting here going, I'm so glad that I grew up in a community where I learned much of what you were talking about through Sunday school or through my church or through our education leaders that we had, because when white kids got dismissed on Wednesday and went to classes for catechism or whatever, we went to our churches to learn Black history.
Yeah.
That's what we did, we learned Black
Yeah.
history, and also in the concept of how that connected with, particularly the Old Testament, okay, that whole Judeo-Christian link and convergence.
Yeah.
So I just felt I had to make these comments because we were not people. We were not considered human. We were property, something to be owned, subjected, and to basically disregard. And so is it no wonder that Black people then, now, and everywhere, and people of color, equality and freedom are intricately entwined? Because how can you be equal if you're not free? And we
Yeah.
were free.
Yeah. I agree with everything you say. And in fact, I said a few of those things in this paper. I talked about the importance of whites valuing property to support their liberty and also to make them rich. Pursuit of happiness and liberty comes partly through slavery. Black people do build America. And for that matter, I haven't said a thing about Indians. They are actually worse off than Black people. They actually do experience something close to genocide. At least the intention was there. But other people have questions? Yes, please.
At the turn of the century, turn of the 20th century,
Yeah, right.
Teddy Roosevelt and people in his administration, didn't they say very similar things about the Filipinos?
Oh, yes.
They seem to think that about everybody except who they were.
Yeah.
They had like the propaganda things that they sent up to people here
Yeah.
about how primitive these people were and that they needed to be controlled.
And in fact, they were rounded up into concentration camps. They weren't then called that. 400,000 Filipinos died in the war of resistance to American authority. America just conquered the Spanish and taken all their colonies, not Cuba, but certainly the Philippines. And yes, this is absolutely, white supremacy is all over the Western world, and it applies to many people apart from blacks. Yes?
Question about how it came up peripherally in your talk, and that is religion. Where did the so-called innate morality of religion, where did it play in this? And were all religions across the board involved in this?
Well, I mentioned the differentness of the Quakers, but I also said that they were regarded as renegades. And their example did not much influence other religious denominations. Later, actually after the Revolution, well, not entirely true, but there was some movement among Northern Protestants, especially Puritan-inclined Protestants, to move in the direction of doubting the morality of slavery and even begin to campaign against it. People like James Otis, who's a major firebrand who proclaims the revolution, supports the revolution, is also, and I gave one quote, is also a proponent of true equality and moving toward equality. When abolitionism becomes serious in this country, which is in the 1830s, the Unitarians and Congregationalists are really ahead of the rest in joining that cause.
Kind of still are. What about Jewish people? Was there any position among Jewish people in the United States?
Frankly, I mean, I should know that, but I'm afraid I don't. There was not a large Jewish population, of course. On the other hand, Jews, unlike other people regarded as different from ordinary whites, actually do pretty well in America. And George Washington actually issues a famous letter or a statement, kind of endorsing the Jewish presence in this country. And but by the same token, have some of you seen the movie Lehman Brothers, which is about the famous New York Lehman Bank that collapsed fairly recently? The Lehman Brothers made their money as factors, as traders in the South. And unfortunately, that movie hardly mentions it. The movie now that it's just made hardly mentions it. This supports your point. Doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, it is what it is, but I
Yeah.
know we're having a conversation and it wasn't happening. Because
Yeah.
it's important that all of us are more aware and sensitized to the
That's why we're all here.
But that's the past, forget that.
Yeah. Well, to me, it's encouraging that so many people do come to things like this. Although, frankly, if you knew what a bummer this lecture was going to be, maybe you wouldn't have showed. I mean, this is we're only 6 days from the 4th of July, and I don't have sparklers, but I do have a candle. Yes.
Did any of the states allow, I was told at one time that Maryland allowed their slaves to learn how to read and write. Is that true or not?
Well, I quoted the Maryland Attorney General speaking of the unacceptability of slavery. I am not aware. By the way, I grew up in Maryland and learned a lot of Maryland history. Unfortunately, that was about 400 years ago. But I'm not aware that that there was that Maryland departed from the Southern pattern. It did become one of the states most prone to free blacks. Frederick Douglass famously ran away from an Eastern Shore plantation when he was about 20 and not only learned to read. I mean, he'd already learned to read. He'd been sent to Baltimore to live with some relatives of his white owner on the Eastern Shore. But Baltimore exposed him to many free blacks, to opportunities for education. He was, of course, a brilliant character, extraordinary character, no formal education whatever, and became one of the most eloquent people in the world. He's a Marylander, but Douglass is really an exception to almost everything. But just a brilliant character. Everyone reads Lincoln, read Douglass. Who, by the way, respected Lincoln as Lincoln respected him.
This reminds me of something that I thought about when you were speaking about it. I couldn't ask. Well, when they decided, one state, one group, of the gradual emancipation, so that by the time the slaves reached Gibraltar, they would be, did they educate them? Did they educate them as children towards that emancipation?
I don't think that was a regular part of the gradual emancipation program, but I think education was included in the spirit and the implications of the program, so that in fact, I mean, people who eventually emancipate their slaves, like Robert Pleasants in Virginia, even before the Revolution, do educate their people. On the other hand, they get labor out of them for the first, after their children, maybe 10 or 12 years. But by the age usually of 21, and I think it's somewhat older for women, perhaps because women have children and then they become slaves.
One of the primary and almost now forgotten main street forces of education in slaves and black people was the church and learning to read the Bible.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was a hallmark that was fundamental in learning how to become educated and speak proper English.
Yeah, in this period, as a matter of fact, as I mentioned, in the South, blacks are prohibited from learning how to read and punished if they try. A person like Douglas blows that off and soon escapes. But black religion, too, was policed. And black churches were usually white ministers who preached to black congregations, and there are such things, are closely watched by the slave owners for fear that, in fact, the spirit of Christianity will inspire the slaves. That they don't need. Obedience, yes.
No other reason to encourage your kids to get a good education. This is it. There's no other reason to encourage your kids to get a good education. Learning to read and absorb all the teachings of history.
Yeah, utterly crucial. And in fact, I mean, blacks are almost as passionate about education as they are about just plain freedom. They know the two go together in the same way that they think freedom and equality go together. But if they're ever to be on a level with the whites, as powerful as the whites, they need recognition of their rights and they need education. Their natural experience has been to disable them, to make them what whites think look like children. The appropriate thing for children is education. Blacks know it, and they pursue it.
When you say education, do you mean learning how to read?
Mostly that, and the lady in the back is certainly right, that reading the Bible is incredibly important. This is a religious country and for most of its history, until the Revolutionary period, which is a more secular period. Not many of the founding fathers are big churchgoers. On the other hand, learning to read the Bible is pretty much fundamental to whites and blacks. The difference is, of course, that whites can, and blacks are often prohibited from the skill that enables them to read the Bible. Sorry about the downer thing, but
One small thing, that you mentioned there were a couple of recommendations you could make about folks who might use to learn more.
yeah, that's a great question. I love that, and you people actually read, I guess, or which is really a tonic for a person like me. I mean, my house is sinking into the ground, let me answer this question. You might want to embroider it. There is a recent new history of the Revolution. The second volume of a projected 3 has just come out by a military historian named Rick Atkinson. Brilliant. I learned a ton that I had not known before, and I'm a lifelong historian virtually. So I really recommend that. It's called, the first volume is called The British Are Coming. The second volume, which appeared about a month ago, is called The Fate of the Day. Each of these volumes covers roughly 2 or 3 years of the Revolution. It is so detailed. They're 500 pages each, at least.
What was the second one called?
The Fate of the Day. And this is Rick Atkinson, fundamentally a military historian. He's also written about World War II in North Africa, and I think some people may know that. Also brilliant work. I mean, the hell of it is, this guy's not an academic historian. I'm not sure he even has a PhD, for heaven's sake, which you would think would disqualify him for studying American history. But he seems to have overcome the handicap. Quite brilliant. I really recommend it. A second book by a historian named Woody Holton, who is an academic historian, teaches at University of South Carolina, has written a book, another revolutionary history that foregrounds the roles of people of color and women in the revolution. Notoriously, they were usually left out of earlier accounts. I've indicated how important blacks were to the revolution. The Indians were equally important, partly because one side was the Americans were intent on conquering them and dispossessing them. The British actually wanted to protect them, partly for their own, for the British sake. In other words, to use them as kind of a hammer over the white colonists to keep them honest. But and then women also. I mean, of course, there are famous women, Abigail Adams, and one of the first historians of the Revolution, Mercy Otis Warren is a woman, and so on. Holton goes to town on this subject, and I really recommend that too. That's the coming thing in the writing of history, is the inclusion of other people apart from property white males. This has been going on actually for 50 years, but it is still the strongest current in American historical writing. Ma'am, you had your hand?
Yes, I do. I know that you are a professor.
No more.
No more, but I would like to have one thing I know from American history and Black history, and also was educated at a historically Black university, where this is always promoted and talked about and taught. I would like to know how your students, when you present this kind of presentation or this kind of class to students, what is the reaction now? Because the way that we, and lots of Blacks, perceive is that we were really never part of the promise of America or the American story, and the story is written by the victors. So the ones who were suppressed really were not acknowledged. How are your students? How did they react?
Students, well, frankly, they're our main hope, and I think it is unfortunate. Actually, it's tragic that students are not participating in greater numbers in demonstrations today. In my generation, I took part in a couple of demonstrations in Washington, anti-Vietnam demonstrations that drew 250,000 young people. And of course, all of us were draft dodgers. I certainly was. I ended up in the Peace Corps. But I would argue that the young people of today are just as threatened by what is going on. All of them, men and women. And therefore should also be out in the streets. And some of them are.
Can I add something to what you were saying? I'm a former teacher, and I taught fifth grade and worked with Tracy Wilson, who was, so I worked on the Witness Stones project with her, and it was one of the most magnificent professional experiences that I've ever had teaching in. I just wish all classes could be taught the way she did it, through her research, and the kids came to these conclusions on their own based on the information that she shared with them. And I just think the way this country is right now, and the whitewashing of our history, I don't know, how do we come back from that? I don't understand it, but I just know the power of good teaching about our history.
What's happening now is a reaction against the proliferation and spread of this diversification, history from below, the history not just of the white rulers, but of all the rest of the population. That's the fundamental impulse driving history today, students respond to this. This is at the college level. You're talking about Tracy teaching at the high school level.
Elementary, in my case.
In your case, well, you know that Tracy herself had a PhD from Brown, a very distinguished place, and so on and so forth. By the way, a Trinity graduate before graduate school. I knew her when I first came to Trinity. I was a new professor, and she was an almost graduating senior at that point. But at the college level, people are closer. The kids are closer to confronting adult responsibilities and having to take care of themselves. So I think in some ways, many college students are more cautious than high school students. I could hardly document that. But you know, I will tell you, my college, Trinity College, is quite a conservative college. It is much more conservative than Wesleyan and several other fancy, high-priced colleges. Place did good things for me, and I think I did good things for it. But it does have that character. Even at Trinity, however. By the way, there was an encampment protesting the Trump administration at Trinity, which frankly surprised me. Of course, there was at Columbia and at Wesleyan, but Trinity too. And you know, I'll just mention that you know, I never had any. When I first arrived, I had a lot of pushback from the sons of Wall Street moguls, of which we have many at Trinity. The Trinity student parking lot is more filled with Rolls and Porsches than the faculty parking lots. Put it that way. On the other hand, a friend of mine, a very charismatic teacher, Jack Chatfield, I'm not sure whether some of you knew him. He died about 10 years ago. He and I were across the hall from each other in a Seabury basement. And he taught the early American half of the U.S. survey. I taught the second half, the modern half of the U.S. survey. Jack was a great teacher and certainly sensitive to all of these issues, but he wasn't, like me, he was not brought up on them. I mean, all of this comes in as we're already teaching. When Jack died, he was replaced by, and by the way, students had always demanded, or had often lobbied for, more attention, particularly to Native Americans, but also to the whole range of the people usually left out. In other words, students were sort of instinctively drawn to the new social history. Even at Trinity, where that often goes against their family background. When Jack died, he was replaced by a man whose specialty is environment and indigenous peoples. And that's a real turnaround. I mean, you know, Jack went to a military academy, and so on and so forth. He was himself a Trinity person, but neither he nor I had the background to satisfy this rising demand among undergraduates. Really, I'm delighted that so many people are engaged with it, with this subject. On the other hand, I really want to give people permission to leave, and I'll stick around and answer questions of other people. Yes.
I just wanted to know another name I didn't catch. Rick Atkinson, I got.
Yeah, Woody Holton, Holton. Another revelatory history. I mean, this is a one-volume history of the whole Revolution, as opposed to Atkinson's 3 volumes on the Revolution. But, you know, well worth reading. By the way, Gordon Wood, I have quoted many of the people that I really admire in all of these lectures. Gordon Wood is the top of them. He is the greatest American, for a long time, has been the greatest American historian of early America, particularly revolutionary America. He has a great book called The Creation of the American Republic, which is an enduring classic. He wrote it about 60 years ago. More recently, he has written The Radicalism of the American Revolution. Very brilliant works. And so I can recommend him as well.
Oh, what a great feature he was.
Huh?
Could you share with Jeff Millian the books and authors you've identified, and maybe if you first
Yeah.
think of books, you could put them on your webpage as
Absolutely.
a reference to the series. I mean, I don't know, there are probably others in the other two, but I think that would be helpful. We could go to that
Yeah.
first, rather than talk to.
Yeah. Well,
Absolutely. I have all of your emails, so I'd be happy, if you're comfortable, I'd be
Well,
happy
we
to
would
send
need
you.
a source for that.
yeah. Well, yeah. Well, that's I'm always here, and I love to teach. So this is a welcome request. This organization, the Webster House, is very much an educational institution, and it does a great deal for children, and I think actually would like to do more for adults too, of the kind that you're seeing here. Todd?
Are all three of your lectures now available online?
Believe it or not, they're all on YouTube.
Okay, that's what I was, for folks who might have
Yeah,
missed.
I don't want to publicize that because I'd have no audience. But people who love what they hear can watch it many times. And I'm right here in town, and you can actually, well, don't call me, but email me.
Is it on the YouTube for the West Hartford Cable?
Yeah, well, the cable is what these people are up there, and Hartford Community Interactive. Okay, yeah, interactive. Yeah.
I'll be sure to include links to all three of the ones, including the one tonight, in addition to the books that come next time.
And I'll mention, and this is a braggadocio, but my first lecture, I think, has been seen by more than 300 people, and the second one by about 250. So that this actually, but of course it is YouTube. I mean, this is famous. Everyone knows it. Believe me, this is nothing compared to the typical YouTube posting. But I'm very pleased that West Hartford Community Interactive has done this. Thank you all for coming.